Just sign the papers, Dad. It's for the family. David said it so easily. The words slid out of his mouth like they were greased with good intentions. He pushed the stack of documents across my kitchen table, the one I built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago. The fine grain of the oak, which I had sanded and sealed until it felt like silk, was now covered by a sheaf of papers that felt like sandpaper against my soul. He smiled. It was a salesman's smile, practiced and thin. The kind of smile he used when he was closing a deal, not when he was talking to his father. It just simplifies things, he continued, tapping a manicured finger on the top page. It was a power of attorney document. Broad, sweeping, absolute. With Mom gone, and you getting on in years. It's better if I can handle the banking, the bills. You won't have to worry about a thing. I didn't say anything. I just looked at his finger. It was clean, uncalloused. My own hands, resting on my lap, were a roadmap of a life lived. Scars from slipped chisels, knuckles thickened by years of gripping a hammer, skin permanently ingrained with the ghosts of wood stain and motor oil. These hands had built this house. They had fixed his first bicycle. They had held his mother, my Sarah, when she was sick. Now, they were being told they were too old to sign a check. My daughter-in-law, Susan, chimed in. She was sitting beside him, her purse perched on her lap like a small, expensive animal. It's just practical, Arthur. We're thinking of you. It's a burden, all this paperwork, a burden. My life, reduced to a stack of paperwork. A burden. I looked past them, out the kitchen window. The bird feeder I had just refilled was busy with sparrows. A cardinal, bold and red, landed for a moment before taking flight. I had built that feeder from cedar scraps. Sarah had loved watching the birds. And this one, David said, sliding another document forward. This is just a preliminary agreement for the house. We found a wonderful agent, very motivated. The market is incredible right now. We can get you into a beautiful little condo. Managed property. No yard work, no fuss. My breath caught. It wasn't a gasp, just a hitch. A snag in the smooth rhythm of my breathing. The house. This house. I had laid the foundation with my own father, his hands guiding mine. Every wall held a memory. The pencil marks in the doorway tracking David's height from a squirming toddler to a surly teenager. The spot on the living room floor where Sarah and I danced to Sam Cooke on our 25th anniversary. The faint scent of her rose perfume that still clung to the curtains in our bedroom, even after 2 years. They were talking about it like it was a portfolio of stocks to be liquidated. We're worried about you here alone, Susan added, her voice dripping with a sympathy that felt like acid. It's too big for one person. I finally looked at the papers. The ink was stark and black against the white. Impersonal. Final. I saw the lines where my signature was supposed to go. Arthur Williams. A name that was supposed to mean something. Now it was just a space to be filled to make their lives easier. The inciting incident, I suppose the lawyers would call it, had not been this conversation. This was just the culmination. The final, polished, well-reasoned insult. The real moment had come a week before. It was my grandson's 8th birthday party. David and Susan's boy, Michael. They had held a big barbecue in their sprawling backyard, the kind with a built-in stone grill and manicured flower beds. I had offered to man the grill. It was a thing I knew, a thing I was good at. My ribs were a thing of quiet legend in our family, a recipe passed down from my father. David had laughed. A short, sharp, dismissive sound. No, it's all high-tech now. Digital thermometers and stuff. You wouldn't know how to work it. Besides, your sauce is a little old-fashioned. He had patted me on the shoulder, a gesture of placation, and pointed me toward a lawn chair in the shade, far from the action. You just relax. Enjoy yourself. I was put out to pasture. An old piece of equipment, no longer compatible with the new systems. I sat there for hours, watching a stranger they'd hired flip burgers that were uniformly gray and dry. I watched my son hold court, laughing with his friends, his back to me. I was a prop, the benevolent, silent grandfather, a piece of scenery. Later, I was making my way back from the restroom inside their cavernous house. The door to their home office was ajar. I heard their voices. David and Susan. They were not arguing. The tone was logistical, matter of fact. "Did you talk to him about the papers?" Susan asked. "I'll do it next week," David replied, his voice tired. "I'll take them over. He'll sign." "He always does." There was a pause. Then Susan's voice, lower, sharper. "We need to get this done, David, before he gets any worse. That house is a gold mine, just sitting there. And what if he falls? It's a liability." Then came the words. The ones that landed like a hammer blow, not to a nail, but to the very frame of my heart. David sighed, a long, weary exhalation. I know. It's a lot to deal with." He paused. "Sometimes I just wish it would be so much simpler." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavy with it. Simpler if I were gone. Simpler if I were no longer a burden. I stood there in the hallway, my hand on the cool plaster of the wall. I felt nothing. It was a strange, hollow sort of shock. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness, not yet. It was just clarity. A cold, clean, terrible clarity. They didn't see a father. They saw a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated, a loose end to be tied up. I turned around, walked silently back out to the party, picked up my plate of uneaten, dry hamburger, and scraped it into the trash. I found my jacket, and without a word to anyone, I let myself out the side gate and walked the 2 miles home. The walk was steady. My feet knew the way. The rhythm of my steps on the pavement was the only sound. Left, right, a steady metronomic beat. With each step, something inside me settled. The hollow feeling began to fill up, not with rage, but with a quiet, unyielding resolve. Now, sitting at my kitchen table a week later, I looked at David's expectant face. I looked at the pen he was holding out to me. It was a fancy silver pen. Heavy, cold. I heard the echo of his words in my mind. It would be so much simpler, and I thought, yes, it would be. I took the pen from him. His smile widened. He thought he had won. My hand did not tremble. I uncapped the pen. The nib was sharp. I looked down at the signature line on the power of attorney. It waited for me. I thought of my Sarah. I thought of my father. I thought of the cardinal at the feeder. I did not sign the paper. Instead, I drew a single, straight line through the entire document, from the top left corner to the bottom right. A clean, decisive strike. Then I did the same to the next document. And the next. David's smile vanished. It evaporated so quickly it might never have been there at all. Dad? What are you doing? Susan gasped. Arthur. I didn't look at them. I just continued my work. Line after line. Each one a quiet declaration. Each one a brick in a new wall. I was a builder, after all. When I was finished, I stacked the papers neatly back into a pile. I capped the silver pen with a soft click. I slid the pen and the now useless papers back across the polished oak. The market is incredible right now, I said. My voice was even. It didn't shake. It was my own. You should know. This house is not for sale. I stood up. My joints complained, as they always did, but I stood tall. I believe you know the way out, I said, and I turned my back on them. I walked over to the sink and began to wash the single coffee cup I had used that morning. I did not look back. I listened to the shocked silence, then the scrape of a chair, the hurried whispers, and finally, the sound of the back door opening and closing. Then there was only the sound of the running water and my own steady breathing. The house was quiet. It was a different kind of quiet than the one I had grown used to. For 2 years, the silence had been a heavy blanket, thick with absence and memory. It was the quiet of waiting. Waiting for a phone call. Waiting for a visit. Waiting for a sign that I was still a part of their lives, not just a fixture in the background. This new quiet was light. It was clean. It was the quiet of a space that was entirely my own. I finished washing the cup, dried it with a linen towel Sarah had embroidered with tiny blue flowers, and placed it back on its hook. My hand was steady. My heart was calm. The decision was made. The line had been drawn, not just on the papers, but in my life. I walked into the living room. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I ran my hand along the back of Sarah's armchair. The leather was worn smooth, cracked in places like the skin on my own hands. I sat down in my own chair opposite hers, the one with the slight dip on the left side. The house felt bigger, somehow. Not too big, as Susan had said, just spacious. Room to breathe. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt a profound and unwavering sense of alignment, as if a bone that had been dislocated for years had finally snapped back into place. The dull ache I hadn't even realized I was carrying was gone. I thought about David's words. It's for the family. What family? The one that saw me as a checklist of responsibilities? The one that whispered about how much simpler life would be without me? That wasn't a family. That was a board of directors managing a declining asset. My family, the one that mattered, was in the grain of this wood, in the scent of these rooms, in the faded photographs on the mantelpiece. Sarah, smiling, her arm looped through mine. My father, proud and stern in his army uniform. My mother, holding a baby David, her face alight with a love so fierce it seemed to radiate from the monochrome print. Where had that baby gone? When did he become a man who saw his father as a burden? I didn't know. Maybe I would never know. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to. The why of it was their story to figure out. My story was about what I did next. I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the light change as the sun moved across the sky. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't put on a record. I just sat in the quiet and let the decision settle into my bones. When dusk began to gather in the corners of the room, I stood up and went to my small office, a room just off the living room that smelled of old paper and wood polish. I switched on the green-shaded desk lamp. It cast a warm, focused pool of light on the blotter. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. Not a legal document, just a plain, cream-colored sheet of stationery. I took out my own pen, a simple fountain pen with a tortoiseshell body that had been a gift from Sarah. It fit my hand perfectly. I began to write a list. It wasn't a list of grievances. It wasn't a list of things to do. It was a list of things that were mine. 1. The house. 2. The workshop and all tools. 3. Father's watch. 4. The 1968 Ford Mustang in the garage. 5. Sarah's photos. 6. The record collection. The list grew. Each item I wrote down was an anchor. Each word was a reclamation. I was taking inventory of my life. Not the monetary value David and Susan saw, but the true value. The value of memory, of skill, of love, of time. When I was done, the page was full. I read it over. It was the charter of a sovereign nation. Population 1. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. This was not unusual. My body had been keeping a carpenter's hours for 50 years. But this morning felt different. I didn't feel the weight of the long, empty day ahead. I felt purpose. I made my coffee, strong and black, the way I liked it. I drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the sky lighten from indigo to pale gray. The sparrows were already at the feeder. After my coffee, I went to the phone. It was an old rotary phone that sat on a small table in the hallway. I had resisted David's attempts to replace it with a cordless one. I liked the solid, deliberate act of dialing, the whir and click of the mechanism. I looked through my old address book, the pages soft and worn. I found the number I was looking for. Albright and Associates, a law firm. Ms. Eleanor Albright had handled Sarah's will. She had been kind, efficient, unsentimental. She was exactly what I needed. I dialed the number. A crisp voice answered on the second ring. I asked to speak to Ms. Albright. I was told she was with a client. I left my name and number. I said it was a personal matter. Then I went into my workshop. The smell of sawdust and oil and old wood greeted me like a friend. This was my sanctuary. For years, my projects had revolved around my family. A cradle for my grandson, a bookshelf for David's new office, a jewelry box for Susan. On the workbench sat a half-finished project, a set of intricate wooden train cars for Michael's birthday. I had been working on them for months. The tiny wheels, the little couplings. I picked up the engine. The wood was smooth under my thumb. I thought of the store-bought, plastic monstrosity they had given him at the party. I thought of my old-fashioned barbecue sauce. I took the engine and the cars, and I placed them carefully into a cardboard box. I didn't smash them. I didn't throw them away. I just packed them up. A project from a life that was now over. I put the box on a high shelf out of sight. Then I cleared the workbench completely. I wiped it down with a soft cloth until the scarred surface gleamed in the light from the single overhead bulb. It was a clean slate. I looked at my collection of tools, hanging neatly on the pegboard wall. My father's old hand plane. My first set of chisels. Each one held a story. I had always assumed they would go to David. He'd never shown any interest, but I had assumed it. It's what fathers did. I took a deep breath. That assumption, like so many others, had been a mistake. They were my tools. They would serve my purpose now. I decided to build something, not for anyone else. For me. I chose a piece of cherry wood from the rack. A beautiful piece with a rich, deep color and a swirling grain. I didn't know what it would become yet. A box? A small table? It didn't matter. The act of creation was the point. The act of making something for myself, with my own hands, was the only thing that mattered. I made the first cut. The saw sang its familiar song. The scent of fresh-cut cherry filled the air. And I began to work. The phone rang in the house around mid-morning. It was Ms. Albright. Her voice was just as I remembered it. Professional, with no wasted warmth. Mr. Williams, I have your message. How can I help you? I need to make some changes to my estate planning. Ms. Albright, I said, my voice steady. Substantial changes, I see, she said. There was a pause, the rustle of a calendar page. Can you be in my office tomorrow at 10? Yes, I said. I'll be there. I hung up the phone. Another brick laid. The foundation was getting stronger. That night, my phone buzzed. A text message from David. I had to put on my reading glasses to see the small screen. Dad, what was that about today? Susan is very upset. Call me. I looked at the message. I saw the words, but I felt the subtext. You have inconvenienced us. You have deviated from the script. Explain yourself. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I could write a long, angry message. I could try to explain the hurt, the years of small cuts that had finally bled me dry. But what was the point? They hadn't listened when I was speaking to them in person. They wouldn't understand the words on a tiny screen. Silence. That was the only language they had left me. Absence. The consequence of being treated like I was already gone. I held down the button. An option appeared. Delete. I pressed it. The message vanished. My screen was blank again. I felt a small, clean satisfaction. It was like wiping the workbench clean. A fresh start. The phone buzzed again an hour later. A missed call. A voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I just deleted it. Another buzz. A text from Susan. Arthur, we are very worried about you. Please let us know you're all right. David is on his way over. Worried. They were worried now. They weren't worried when they were discussing my premature demise over canapes. They were worried now that the plan had gone off the rails. I read the last part again. David is on his way over. I walked to the front door and slid the deadbolt across. It made a solid, satisfying thud. I did the same with the back door. I went around the house and checked that all the windows were locked. This was my house. Entry was by invitation only, and his invitation had been revoked. I went back to my armchair and picked up a book. It was a history of the Harlem Renaissance, full of poets and artists and musicians who had built something beautiful and lasting out of defiance and pride. I began to read. About 30 minutes later, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Headlights swept across the living room curtains. Then, footsteps on the porch. A knock. Sharp, impatient. Dad? Open up. It's me. I kept reading. I turned a page. The paper felt crisp under my fingers. The knocking came again, louder this time. Dad, I know you're in there. Your car is here. Stop this nonsense and open the door. Nonsense. My quiet revolution was nonsense to him. A childish tantrum. I heard him try the doorknob. It rattled uselessly. He swore under his breath. Fine. Be that way. He shouted through the door. You want to act like a child, fine. Call me when you decide to be a grown-up. I heard his heavy footsteps stomp back down the porch steps. A car door slammed. The engine roared to life, and then the sound of tires squealing on the pavement as he sped away. The quiet returned. I closed my book, marking my page. A grown-up. He wanted me to be a grown-up. A grown-up in his world was someone who did what they were told. Someone who signed the papers. Someone who faded away quietly and conveniently. By his definition, I had never been more of a grown-up in my entire life. The next morning, I put on my good suit. The charcoal gray one I wore to church. I polished my Sunday shoes until I could see my face in them. The ritual was calming. The smell of the wax, the rhythmic buffing with the soft cloth. It was an act of preparing for something important. It was an act of self-respect. Ms. Albright's office was in a tall glass building downtown. It smelled of sterile air, conditioning, and expensive paper. It was the opposite of my workshop in every way. She was a tall, elegant black woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Mr. Williams, please sit." She gestured to a leather chair opposite her large, uncluttered desk. "You said you wanted to make substantial changes." "I do," I said. "I want to start over. A new will. A new power of attorney. Everything." She folded her hands on the desk. "Who is your current executor and power of attorney?" "My son, David Williams." "And you wish to remove him?" "I do," I said. From everything, she didn't flinch. She simply made a note on a legal pad. Her penmanship was precise and clear. "May I ask why?" It helps to understand the context. I could have told her everything. The years of neglect. The whispers of the party. The papers on my kitchen table. But I didn't. She didn't need the emotion. She needed the facts. "Our interests are no longer aligned," I said. It was the truest, simplest way to put it. She nodded slowly. "A common occurrence. And who do you wish to name in his place?" This was the question I had been pondering all night. I had no one else. No other children. My friends were my age or older. Naming one of them would be saddling them with a burden I was unwilling to pass on. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "For the power of attorney, perhaps a professional. A trust officer at the bank, that can be arranged," she said. "And the will? Your assets? The house?" This was the heart of it. The reason I was here. I took a breath. "I want to sell the house," I said. Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise. "Your son mentioned you might be considering a sale. My son's plans for the house are irrelevant," I stated calmly. "I will sell it, on my own terms, and the proceeds, along with all my other assets. I want them to go somewhere specific, to an individual." "No," I said, "not to an individual, to an idea." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a brochure I had picked up at the library months ago. I had been drawn to it then, for reasons I didn't fully understand. Now I did. I unfolded it and slid it across her desk. The brochure was for the Foundation for the Preservation of Black American History. It was a small, dedicated organization that funded archives, restored historical sites, and provided scholarships for young historians. Their mission was to ensure that the stories that were often overlooked, the stories of people like my father who came north in the Great Migration, the stories of the builders and the poets and the soldiers, were not forgotten. "I want to create a trust," I said, my voice gaining strength. "The Arthur and Sarah Williams Trust. Upon my death, I want everything to be transferred to this foundation." Ms. Albright picked up the brochure. She read it carefully. Her professional mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw a glimmer of something else in her eyes. Respect. Understanding. "Everything?" she asked, her voice softer now. "You want to leave nothing to your son? Or your grandson?" I thought of Michael, a sweet boy who only knew the grandfather he was presented with, a quiet old man in a chair. I thought of David, my son, my only child. A part of me, a deep, instinctual part, ached at the finality of it. But the decision was firm. You cannot pour water into a bucket that is full of holes. My legacy, my life's work, the value of this house built by my father's hands and mine, it had to go somewhere it would be valued. Somewhere it would be preserved. My son has his own resources, I said. He is not in need. This is for the family. The larger family. I used his own words. They tasted different in my mouth. They tasted like truth. Ms. Albright looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, a sharp, decisive movement. All right, Mr. Williams, she said, picking up her pen. Let's get to work. I spent 2 hours in her office. We went through everything. Bank accounts, investments, the title to the house, the Mustang. I revoked David's name from the joint savings account we had set up years ago for emergencies. I signed papers to establish a new account at a different bank, one he didn't know about. With each signature, I felt lighter. The burden Susan had spoken of was indeed being lifted, but not in the way she had intended. I was unburdening myself of their expectations. I was unburdening myself of the weight of their disregard. When I left her office, the city air felt fresh and clean. I walked not like an old man, but like a man with a purpose. A man who was the sole director of his own life. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet activity. I met with a real estate agent Ms. Albright recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Gable who saw the house for what it was, a well-maintained property with good bones. She didn't talk about knocking down walls or gut renovations. She admired the woodwork. She understood its value. I met with a man from a classic car consignment shop. He ran a reverent hand over the hood of the Mustang. A beauty, he murmured. Unrestored. Original, we agreed on a price that was fair. Seeing it driven away was a pang, but a necessary one. It was a part of my past, and I was building a future. The for sale sign went up in the yard. It was a strange thing to see. A public declaration of the private war I was waging. The phone calls and texts from David and Susan intensified. They became a frantic barrage. A for sale sign? Are you out of your mind? Dad, you can't do this. We had a plan. Arthur, your son, is beside himself. You're being cruel. This is not you. Someone is influencing you. That last one almost made me laugh. Someone was influencing me. It was me. I was influencing myself for the first time in a long time. I continued my new ritual. Read the message. Delete. Hear the voicemail notification. Delete. The silence was my shield and my sword. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't the sharp, angry rap of my son. It was a lighter, more hesitant sound. I looked through the peephole. My heart gave a lurch. It was my granddaughter, Imani, David's daughter from his first marriage. She was 19, a student at the city college. Imani was different, quieter, more observant. She had her grandmother's eyes. She always looked at me, not through me. I hesitated. My policy was no entry. But this was Imani. I slid the deadbolt open and cracked the door. She stood on the porch, holding a small paper bag. She looked nervous. Grandpa, can I come in? I opened the door wider. Imani, she stepped inside, and I closed the door behind her. She looked around the living room, at the stacks of boxes I had started to pack. Dad said, he said you were selling the house, she said, her voice small. I am, I said simply. She looked at me, and her eyes were full of a genuine concern that was nothing like her father's manufactured worry. Why? I motioned for her to sit in Sarah's chair. I sat in my own. It's time for a change, I said. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. He's really angry. Him and Susan. They're saying you're not well, that you're being manipulated, and what do you think? I asked. Imani was quiet for a long moment. I think, she said slowly, that I've watched them treat you like a piece of furniture for years. I think I saw you at Michael's party. You looked so alone, and I didn't say anything. And I'm sorry, the apology landed in the quiet room with the weight of a sacrament. It was the first honest thing I had heard from my family in years. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry, Grandpa. For them. For me not being better. I felt a crack in the wall I had built around my heart. A small one. Just for her. It's not your fault, child, I said, and my voice was rough with emotion. You have always been a good granddaughter. I brought you something, she said, reaching into the bag. She pulled out a small container of barbecue sauce. It's not your recipe. I don't have that, but it's from that little place down on Grove Street you like. I thought maybe you'd want it. It was such a small gesture, but it was everything. She had seen me. She had remembered what I liked. She had tried to bridge the gap, not with demands, but with a simple act of kindness. Thank you, Imani, I said. That means more than you know. We sat there and talked for an hour. I didn't tell her the details of the trust or the foundation. It wasn't her burden to carry, but I told her I was moving to a smaller place. I told her I was making a life that was my own. She didn't question it. She just listened, and she understood. When she left, she hugged me tightly. You'll tell me where you're moving, right? I still want to visit. For real, I will, I promised. As I closed the door behind her, I knew I had to make a change to my plans. A small one, but an important one. The next day, I called Ms. Albright. I need to amend a trust, I told her. Oh, I want to carve out a portion for an educational fund for my granddaughter, Imani Williams. Not a lump sum. Money for tuition, for books, for travel. To help her build her own life. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I think that's a wonderful idea, Mr. Williams, Ms. Albright said. My house sold in a week. There was a bidding war. The final price was more than I could have imagined. David must have been apoplectic. I instructed Mrs. Gable to handle everything. All communication went through her and Ms. Albright. I was insulated from the noise. While the sale was closing, I found a small apartment in a quiet building across town. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me, one for a small workshop, and a balcony that got the morning sun. It was clean, bright, and blessedly anonymous. I hired movers. I packed the things that mattered. My books, my records, Sarah's photos, my father's watch, a few key tools. The rest, the heavy furniture, the decades of accumulated stuff, I let go. An estate sale company came and cleared it all out. My friend George, from the barber shop, came over to help. He was a retired plumber, a man of few words and deep understanding. He didn't ask a lot of questions. Moving on up, I see, he said, looking at the empty rooms. Just moving, George, I said. Heard your boy is throwing a fit, he commented as we played a game of dominoes on a cardboard box, the sharp crack of the bones echoing in the hollow house. He'll get over it, I said. Or he won't, George said, slamming down the double 6. Not your problem. A man's got a right to his own peace. Took me 60 years to learn that. He looked at me, his eyes clear over the tops of his glasses. Good for you, Arthur. Good for you. The validation from a peer, a man who had walked a similar road, was another brick in my foundation. The final confrontation came on the day the movers were scheduled to arrive. A car screeched to a halt in front of the house. This time, both David and Susan got out. They marched up the walkway, their faces masks of fury. I saw them coming. I was sitting on the porch steps, drinking a last cup of coffee in a house I built. I didn't get up. What do you think you were doing? David demanded. He was shouting. His face was red. I'm moving, I said calmly. You sold our house. Susan shrieked. Our inheritance. My house. I corrected her gently. I sold my house and the money. David spat. What have you done with the money? That lawyer of yours won't tell us anything. You're my father. I have a right to know. A right. The word hung in the air between us. I set my coffee cup down on the step beside me. I looked up at my son. I saw not the baby from the photograph, not the boy whose height I had marked on the doorframe. I saw a stranger with my blood, but a stranger nonetheless. You have a right to nothing, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his anger like a sharp blade. A right is earned, David, through respect, through love, through common decency. You don't have a right. You have an expectation, and I have chosen not to meet it. He was speechless for a moment. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. Why, he finally choked out. Why are you doing this to us? To your family? I stood up then. I was tired of the argument, tired of the noise. I just wanted it to be over. Because I heard you, I said. He frowned. Heard me? What are you talking about? At Michael's party, I said. In your office. I heard what you said to Susan. I looked at her, and she had the grace to look away. I heard you wish that I was gone, that it would be so much simpler. The color drained from David's face. He looked like he had been punched. Dad, I didn't mean it like that, he stammered. It was just, I was stressed. I know exactly how you meant it, I said. You meant it would be easier to cash in the asset if the asset wasn't living and breathing in the house. You just said the quiet part out loud. I'll let the truth of that sit there on the porch with us. The mover's truck pulled up to the curb, its diesel engine a low rumble. The money, I said, is going somewhere it will be appreciated. It's going to foundation, to preserve our history, the story of people who built things. Instead of just waiting to inherit them, I looked him dead in the eye. It's for the family, I said, using his words one last time. The real one. I turned without another word, walked back into my empty house, and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I just closed it. The click of the latch was the final word in the conversation. I walked through the echoing rooms one last time, my hand trailing along the walls. Goodbye to the ghosts. Goodbye to the memories. They were good memories, but I could not live inside a museum of my own past. I let the movers in through the back and directed them to the boxes. An hour later, it was all done. I handed the keys to Mrs. Gable, who was waiting in her car. I didn't look back at the house as I drove away. My new apartment was clean and empty and full of light. It smelled of fresh paint. I directed the movers to place the few boxes and pieces of furniture. When they were gone, I stood in the middle of the empty living room. The quiet was absolute. It was the sound of a new beginning. I spent the first week unpacking. I set up my small workshop in the second bedroom. I arranged Sarah's pictures on a bookshelf. I put my records next to the old turntable. I established a new routine. Coffee on the balcony in the morning. A walk to the library in the afternoon. In the evening, I would put on a record, John Coltrane or Etta James, and I would read. Or I would go into my workshop and work on my new project. The piece of cherry wood was slowly becoming a beautiful, intricate box. Just for me. I was not waiting. I was living. Imani visited as promised. She brought groceries and didn't complain about the small space. She helped me hang pictures. We talked, really talked. I told her stories about her grandmother she had never heard. I saw the house, the old life, reflected in her eyes, but it was a memory, not a claim. A month after I moved, a letter arrived. It was forwarded by Ms. Albright's office. The handwriting on the envelope was David's. I held it for a long time. I could have thrown it away unopened. Part of me wanted to, but I was a different man now. A man who faced things. I opened it. It was a single page. Dad, it began. I don't know what to say. I've been thinking about what you said. About what I said. You were right. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I took you for granted. I saw you as a problem, not as my father. I am ashamed. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to say that I am sorry. I am truly sorry. Your son, David. I read the letter 3 times. The words were there. The apology I never thought I would hear. Did I believe it? I wasn't sure. Change is hard, and he had a long way to go. But it was a start. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. I didn't reply. Not yet. Forgiveness, if it was to come, would be a process, not an event. It would be on my terms, on my timeline. I walked over to the record player and put on a blues album. The raw, honest sound of a man singing his pain and his truth filled the small apartment. I looked around my new home, at the books, at the pictures, at the sunlight streaming through the clean glass of the balcony door. I didn't feel happy, not in a giddy, triumphant way. I felt something deeper. I felt steady. I felt whole. I felt clean. My name is Arthur Williams. I am a builder, and I had finally built a life that was truly my own. It was a small life, perhaps, a quiet one, but it was strong, and it was mine, and that was more than enough. It was everything. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone. They need to know that it's never too late to pick up your tools and build a new foundation, just for yourself.